So much sense.
Hello and welcome to the Zach Thinks Your podcast. I'm excited today. I have Neha Ruch with me. Am I saying your last name correctly, Ruch?
You nailed it.
Okay.
Nailed it.
She's worked on and is releasing her book, The Power of Pause, coming in January. I got to listen to her speak and practice what she preaches back at Mom 2.0 in April this past year. It's cool getting to sit down with you because I think after watching Working Moms, which I hopefully someday get to meet the Catherine Reitman there, I don't feel like there's quite enough moms talking about the strife that they talked about that. And you're the first one that I've really found really focuses on the issue of like career management along with being a mom and taking what pause you need to want to logically need for your soul, need for your wealth, need for your family. So I'm looking forward to, I have a couple questions I'm hoping are a tiny bit hard and
Cool.
watching you work on your feet. But if you could add in, because I know, so you have Mother Untitled, could you say a little bit more about kind of what your background or your bio is?
Sure. So, first of all, thank you for having me. I
Welcome.
look forward to the hard questions. They're going to be fun. I was in brand marketing for 10 years. That was my career. I loved it. I landed my dream job. I'd graduated Stanford Business School by every sort of metric of success. I was checking the boxes and I got, like so many of us do, so much self-worth, a sense of approval from that work. And then I had my first kid, was rocking with him, thinking, I finally don't have to try so hard. He just wants me. And that felt like a real relief after trying to sort of contort to fit in so many spaces for so long. And I really just wanted more of that. I initially downshifted my career into consulting 2 days a week, and the rest of the week I was at home with him. Eventually I would fully pause. But even in downshifting, I heard from so many people like, what are you going to do all day? Aren't you going to be bored? Why do you even bother going to business school? And meanwhile, I was meeting all of these incredible women who, similar to myself, identified with ambition, had clocked in a decade in their career, had equitable relationships with their partners, had access to tools and technologies. So they were taking a class or they were creating or they were freelancing, and none of it matched the like tropes I was hearing and the old stereotypes. So I started the platform at the height of the lean in movement and the girl boss era. I had my first kid almost 10 years ago. And I think it was the first time we could have a chance to reshape the narrative about ambitious parents who were leaning into family life for a chapter. So I'm glad you see that, because I think that that was a really important space to carve out, that this is part of the career journey and the career story, but we deserve sort of a dignified space for it. And that's what the platform started as.
So as I was like thinking about what I wanted to talk about with you today, I was like circling around this idea, and at some point I came to, so power of pause, right? When I hear pause, I think like you're doing something and then you're stopping inertia from moving you forward. And the power of it, right, is there's a purposefulness to it. And I think a lot of people do an accidental pause and then they're not, like, you're pointing out like the purposefulness of it. And so you also have talked about it's like a pause on your career kind of to focus on motherhood. My question first for you is, can what is a career, and or can you be a career mother?
Such an interesting way to think about it. I think I would say a career pause isn't a life pause, right? And a career pause isn't a career ender. But career historically has been associated with the work we do for pay. And we know that parenthood is like grossly undervalued. But in making room for family life, you can make room for yourself to grow alongside in new ways that aren't necessarily associated with your career. And that can actually be really powerful, because when we step away from the career titles that define us and the sort of career success metrics that we've sort of been moving through the motions trying to accomplish, we can actually figure out, what do we want to be when we grow up? How do we want to feel? Who do we want to be spending time with? And we can still identify with ambition, which is like purely defined as the work of doing, right? That can be doing many different things with determination and care. And that might mean shifting away from our paid careers, but we can use the time intentionally. And I'm so glad you called that out, to, yes, like focus on our family life and enjoy that in a different way, but also start to be intentional about well, how can I plant seeds for myself to grow personally, creatively, and redesign what life looks like aligned with my values?
I hadn't thought about this until just now, but I'm curious what your thoughts on this. Now, first, I'm going to acknowledge my privilege in that as a man, like I have a lot. I think there's a lot of things that I'm going to do that you're going to do as well that I'm going to get praised for, and you're going to get criticized for or called out for, or like it's just going to be received differently. So when we had our currently only, but I want to say first, I was a teacher. I had the privilege of being in a school. It was a really small school of like 21 students with a lot of challenges.
Mhm.
I was surrounded by a couple of other teachers that were like full throttle, like they're going to go and have their full 3 months maternity leave. So there was the English teacher. She took her 3 months. She was super unapologetic. She's like, "Yep, see you guys in 3 months. Don't email me."
Mm.
And I think seeing that kind of conviction around her pause, even if it's for 3 months, gave me the conviction to say, "See you guys in 3 months. I think I'm doing this right." Like, okay, bye, Zach. See you a bit. And I had the opportunity of having pretty much 4 months. I think the universe was telling me, um, I that was kind of when I started growing on TikTok a lot. Was talking about being a first time dad, trying to create equity at home, and I kept saying like, I'm going to get 4 months paternity leave. I don't know how. The night before I was supposed to go back, I got appendicitis and had to have emergency surgery. Literally, I had texted my boss like 12 hours before saying, "Yep, see you on Monday." And then I texted them back the following morning saying, "Just kidding. I'm in surgery right now. I'll probably see you in about a month." So I think it was that I somehow manifested that into my appendix and then ended up with a 4th month. But I wonder where this would fall within your almost definition of pause, where so I took 3 months, had that strangely manifested fourth one, got back to work and was like, I don't know how we're going to function as a home with me not here enough. I was out of the house
Mhm.
about 50 hours a week. And Alyssa was really encouraging me. So she said, like, you've always talked about you might be good at sales. Like, now that the pandemic hit, we have this opportunity of remote work exists. And so I switched careers about 2, 3 months later. I went into hybrid remote sales. So I was home 3 days a week and I was in office 2 days a week. Where would that career trajectory? So I was in sales for 2 years and now I'm doing this full time as a coach for men. Where would you put that experience within your definition of what pause looks like?
Well, I think to back out, what you're speaking about is this idea of just the long game of career and family, right? Which is comprised of pauses, it's comprised of shifts, it's comprised of sprints. And I think what we see in the Mother Untitled community, but just more globally, is we're seeing people make room for family life in different ways, right? And oftentimes the women who come to Mother Untitled and will be picking up the book are pausing or considering a pause. And a lot of times they're downshifting in their career, or they're shifting away from the career they've known to find more flexibility to make room for family life. And it calls into question, well, how do I part with the identity I've always known in this work that I've always done, right? Because we live in a culture where what do you do stands in for who are you. And so if you get really used to saying I'm a teacher and that conveys certain values that you take pride in, well, what now, right? And so they are navigating that ambition shift. Oftentimes they are, especially if they're sort of downshifting their paid working hours, re-examining finances. And I know you and I will probably get into that and how we think about that in a way that can still feel dignified. And oftentimes they're in some way making sense of, well, how does this stage of life where I'm shifting things up to make room for family life mean that I'm still growing as a professional, as a person? How can I be intentional about this time? How can I still get the support I need? How can I enjoy this time a little bit more? And ultimately, how can I unlock the possibility? And you did that, right? You made a shift consciously to make room for family life. And in doing that, you allowed yourself a little room to explore creatively and experiment with other ideas and experiment with other forums and platforms and network with new people. And it did eventually lead you to a different path full of perspective, impact, and meaning. We see obviously that shift happen for many of the women in this community. And I think that is part of the power of the pause. It's making room certainly to raise kids, but you're making just a little bit of room to figure out what really lights you up and figure out what comes next.
Yeah. I want to ask what comes up for you when you hear a woman she's looking at going back to work, being asked the question, is it worth you going back to work?
I think I tackled that question as much as I get, is it worth you working on that project that isn't making that much money? And I think we equate work to monetary value, right? And I think work is, first of all, a number of things. It is work for pay, and it can be work that builds a long-term story of possibility and opportunity. And so if you look, I mean, for parents working traditionally out of the home, whether they're working part-time or full-time, right? I think you probably talk about this as well, this idea that your contribution to the household in pay can't just be thought of in a vacuum, right? Because what you're doing is you're building opportunity for the long term. And so if you are making the choice to part with paid work, it comes with what is the opportunity cost there. And oftentimes that's a big risk for women parting with paid work. But when you're returning to paid work, and maybe you can't offset the cost of childcare, then we think about this in a different way, that childcare actually comes out of the joint household income. And you together, as two participants in this joint household organization, are deciding to invest in both of your careers, right? By investing in that childcare that enables you to work. And work comes in a lot of forms. There are more options on the table. That is the goal ultimately with the Power Pause. It is not to say stay-at-home motherhood or career breaks or career downshifts is the right choice. It's to say that we need more choices on the table that work for families. And we need more choices that are supported. But ultimately, the goal is really to be able to empower women and men who choose to pause or downshift to be able to transition back, to stay connected to income, to stay connected to a way in which they're allowed to also feel whole and contributing and forward moving.
What was the hardest context shift for you as you looked at your pause? And it sounds like you're building the airplane as it goes. I think for me, as I shifted, like looking at going from teacher to moving to sales to doing this full time and becoming a coach, like a huge part of, I think, what a lot of men are taught in our society, and I think the feminist movement has brought a lot of women towards this as well, is that if you're getting paid, then you're in the right direction. I think that's like the general idea of a capitalist society that we're in. I think for a lot of high achieving, like high managerial or director level or VP level, like women leaders, like I think that's probably a milestone or like a trajectory that they're kind of aiming for. But what do you think was like a lesson that you had to learn, maybe the hard way, or that you wish you could have learned maybe the easier way? That was a context shift for you in seeing how you were spending your hours in the week.
So I'll tell you the part that came easily. I truly believed myself to be ambitious and modern and feminist when I made the choice to step into stay-at-home motherhood, despite what sort of the external voices were saying or what the media was reflecting back to me. And I wanted other women to feel that way. But that part came more easily. I think the financial side, being able to express my contribution in the work that I was doing, unpaid in the home, and my sort of stake in the household came somewhat easily. My belief that a career pause was not a career ender, like I truly believed that I had accrued enough education and work experience, as most parents do now, having children older than that, than 30 at this point on average. And so that part felt intact. It was when I started to set myself up for the day to day. I think so often when we have traditional work, we're handed what the metrics are, right? Promotion, title bump. And when that's taken away, and then you're spending your day to day caregiving, you think, well, what's the external marker of my success? It must be how my children are behaving or how well they eat. And as a parent of a picky eater and two very slow to warm up children, that was a real ego hit, right? Like, because I wasn't raising performers. And it is sadly true that when we polled a survey called the American Mothers on Pause survey of 1,200 stay-at-home mothers across the country. That includes parents who are in downshifted careers working less than 20 hours out of the home. Only 4% cited their own health and wellness as a metric of their success. And that was tied with a clean house, right? And so what we see in that, and what I experienced, was this sort of looking to what the sort of external validation of earning our worth and value as home parents. And so I think stepping out of that really took, well, how can I feel like a success as a parent without putting that kind of pressure on my child? And without putting that pressure on myself to have like an impeccable home and perfectly curated meals, because I'm not a cook, like that's just not my strong suit. And so it really became, well, how can I set my own goals that will make me feel like I'm forward moving? And then how can I use those goals to allow me to invest in the areas of my day that matter the most? And so I'll use the example of Mother Untitled. When I was working on that in naps and night times for 6 years, and I got a lot of, well, how does that make money? And having to redefine for myself that this was still worth doing frozen chicken nuggets so that I could just work on this during nap time meant saying, well, this is really about learning. This is about building something of impact that could serve me down the line. So I think that redefinition for myself was probably the work that was the most interesting, the work that was the most deep, and the work that had the largest ripple effect, right? I think the second part, and we can talk more about this, was sort of my backwards ideas around help. I was definitely one of the many women, 1 in 3 women, have never had paid help or any help, including family assistance, because they believe, like I did, like if you don't do paid work, you don't deserve help. And then it just took me, exploding on my poor 3-year-old to realize, now 9-year-old, but then 3-year-old, that I, deserved to be healthy and supported, and that no one should work 24/7 without breaks. But that takes sadly, I think that takes a lot of rewriting some of our tropes around help and paid work and unpaid work.
What do you think if you could shake a sister out, like, look, you are worth like having paid help. Like, what is the message that you think so many women that need, like, what do they need to hear to be able to make that shift, do you think?
There's a few things. I hate making it about the kids, because I think it feeds into this sort of trope that we're doing everything only for our children. But I think that when you think of reframe help not as help for the mom, help does not exist just for one parent. Help impacts the entire household, right? And when we start to think about, well, how does it help the whole system? Well, it lessens the burden on both partners, right? It allows both partners more time for rest and wholeness. That obviously has a ripple effect on the children. It empowers, and I spoke to a number of psychologists for the chapter on help to really help me understand how it benefited the kids too. For kids to understand that they are safe and secure in other environments and with other caregivers, that actually allows them to operate and walk through the world with a little bit more ease. And so understanding that help also doesn't have to be a full-time nanny or nothing, right? That there are creative solutions that can work for your family. It also doesn't have to be childcare. It can be outsourcing meals, it can be outsourcing laundry, right? But allowing yourself to get diligent about, well, what could help our family thrive, and not just how can this be about me and this is my investment out of my non-income. No, this is an investment out of the joint household income because it benefits everyone.
Yeah, and one of the metaphors I really try to help people understand mental and invisible labor with is just like looking at your home as an organization, just like any other corporate organization. And I used to work at a software company, and I was in sales. So sales brings in money, marketing helps them make that sales, and then there's customer success, there's HR. So I mean, if you are a co-founder with your partner, and they're going out and making the money, there's sales and marketing, and the person taking care of the kids, you can see the kids as either the clients or the employees, but probably the clients. So you could argue that in that moment, right, you were seeing yourself as customer success, and you're having a moment where you need to outsource more of the customer success. You need to outsource some of the HR. And we see that in the corporate world where be like, okay, we need an IT department. Let's hire out, like we can actually just get an IT department rather than hiring in-house. So I think if we were looking at our home as a corporation and how people handle things in corporations, you can outsource help for different things.
Mm-hmm.
And if that means you need to go outsource and get an IT department or HR, like you can do that. And I think, like you said, is like so many people just say he's the income earner and she's everything else. She wears all the other C-suite hats and director hats. If we're looking at as an organization and what the organization needs, I think if you can look at them as co-piloting, co-founding, I think it's easier to see the value of it impacts the whole house. And a lot of people, I think, struggle with that one.
Well, and I love that analogy because I think the other side of it is that if you were a lean organization without much staff, you would lower the expectations of what was possible from that company, right? You don't compare a 2-person company to a 10-person company. And I think that in the day of social media where we've sort of perpetuated the supermom myth, it can really help to say, well, if I don't have, and I still do this, right? If I don't have help X days a week, on those days, what can we do to make meals lighter? How can we reduce the expectations on what the house is going to look like? And what can we watch like a half an hour of TV in the evening to make it? You're just reevaluating what's possible based on the resources you have.
One of the things that I coach a lot of my clients to do is have consistent check-ins with their partner. We call them, well, for a little while, we called them boring meetings because my wife was sarcastic one day and decided to say, this is so boring. But I am consistently recommending, you can see over my shoulder, the fair play method. We aim to implement the fair play method and looking at what the roles and responsibilities look like in the home. When you and your partner were entering into a phase of first child, second child, what were some of the hard conversations that you think you navigated really well? Or what was like the underlying philosophy that you think you had that made those conversations work?
I talk about this in the book and lay it out that I think the single best thing we did was that even before having kids, my husband was running a tech company at the time, a startup, and he took the P&L that he used for the business and he applied it to our home. And we would have monthly money meetings, and then we would have a top of the year budgeting forecast situation where we would go down categories, and we still do this every January. And then we have a monthly meeting where we're reviewing where we are against target. And we would say, this is the income in, and these are the different categories, right? Dining out, travel, household and personal. Sadly, Amazon, like that household and personal, I mean, it's just like a black hole at this point. But I think because we had that in place, we were able to have a very tangible money conversation about 4 months ahead of me deciding to downshift my career. And then about 6 months into having trialed the downshifted career and then making the decision to fully pause. And we always talked about it as a joint household income. And we talked about it where, sort of it was like black and white, this is the income in. We didn't say Neha's income, Dan's income. We were making adjustments against some of those categories, but we were both making, we both have a clothing budget and we assign ourselves those budgets almost as a game to see who actually like stays under the goal. And it wasn't like one of us was making cuts. And so then later on, when we decided to bring on a mother's helper part-time, when we transitioned to 2 children, after that first time, I really yelled at my poor 3-year-old. Clearly I haven't shaken that. It was easier to say, okay, we're adding this line item around childcare, and it's coming out, and this is how we're going to sort of move the numbers around. But it was a dignified conversation. I was an equal participant in the conversation. It had been that way previously. And I think had there been any red flag or even an orange flag that like there's something about the lack of value of my contribution, I don't know if I would have felt as comfortable taking as much of a downshift. But B, I might have considered if I'd really wanted to do that, putting in paperwork to just formalize that sort of protect our interests and make sure that I felt respected and valued. And we talk about it in the book. That is gut instinct. Like your partnership as well as possible, as well as the next person, whether you're doing something like the fair play method or you're going to a lawyer or financial planner and putting together a postnuptial agreement. There's no shame in having a plan. And there's nothing nerdy about having those family admin money meetings. And to this day, now we still, every Sunday, I think one of the things that's been interesting is as I shift to more work out of the home, we have had to recalibrate on. And so every Sunday, we talk about who's doing pickups, how much childcare we have, an after school babysitter, what days we need her, and any appointments or paperwork that needs to get done. And we have a shared family to-do list. So I think this sort of that transparency and that open conversation, but the coming back annually to recalibrate on what we need as a family, because I think that gives you a permission if you're parting with one part of the family income or you're investing in more childcare, it allows you sort of a set period to test that and then come back to the table and reevaluate as you go.
Now, I'm sure there's a lot of women listening to this that are hearing how your partner approached it, bringing the P&L, seeing it as like a combined income. I'm sure there's a lot saying, shit, how do I get my partner to be on that same page? Now, I can imagine as an entrepreneur that there's a little bit of a mindset that might cater itself to thinking that way. Is there a mindset that you had to help him get to be able to embrace that?
I'll tell you that even with the most progressive hands-on partner, I will never forget this fight. He said, well, staying at home is a luxury. And I remember thinking, well, no. You going to work, not having to worry about a single thing that's happening in this home is a luxury. We really had it out. And I remember thinking, well, what is the sticking point? Because for so long, stay-at-home motherhood has been associated with luxury. And by the way, I think it's part of the tropes, right? Because I think in associating it with luxury, when we know that actually 60% of people in America today, if they are pausing their career, are doing so with financial considerations because of the cost of childcare. 1 in 3 parents feel forced to. I did not. I did have the privilege of choice. And there is a privilege to get to choose, but that's very different than luxury. And I think in associating any one side with luxury, we deem it less worthy of support. And I felt like there was a lot of education there that I had to do about, well, this is what happens in the day-to-day that doesn't feel at all luxurious. And I think I eventually got to a place I was able to express this vulnerably and say, I really feel like because I am doing all of this, restocking of the diaper cream, packing of the diaper, being able to create a safe environment where our children thrives, you are able to single task in the workforce and be able to enjoy this ride that you deserve to enjoy too, because I'm enjoying this. But just because I'm doing it out of joy and love does not mean it's not hard. And I think that's the trap that we fall into, is if we shift our careers because we want more time with our children, then we think, well, I have to be doing it 24/7 without help. And then culture is sort of glommed onto that to say the same thing, which is, well, it's luxurious to be at home. And so, the combination of those messages led me to believe that I didn't deserve help. So we did a lot of unpacking around that distinction between luxury and privilege. And I think what really helped was 2020. When he really needed to land the plane on his business, and he was upstairs and I was downstairs with 2 kids, and he got a front row seat to what was happening. And he was fully clear that he was depending on that care.
So, I mean, sounds kind of similar to my paternity leave, and not only having a front row seat, but like being on the court probably a good amount of time, where even if you're just upstairs, like you end up being a participant in there too.
Hearing the chaos. Yes, he was hearing the chaos.
So you're saying that was like a really pivotal time, was him being there during 2020 when he was a part of that experience under the same roof. Well, I think one of the DM questions that I always I'm scared to answer because I don't like telling women that they need to do more emotional labor to effectively communicate to their partners what mental and emotional labor is.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
all the time I get the question of like, how do I explain mental to my husband? And what I often try to, again, I don't make videos about this because I get torn to shreds in the comments of just saying, stop telling us to do more emotional labor. We're already doing that. But if it's a DM question, I'll usually say, I highly recommend labeling the emotional and mental labor that your partner is doing in their job and that they get really well paid for. As a tech startup, I'm sure he was making really emotional decisions about employees, doing a lot of cognitive labor within, making business decisions and steering the boat. And I think if you can label what they're doing there, then when you go to label what you're talking about, what you're experiencing, they have a lot easier time hearing the emotional and mental labor that you're dealing with. What do you think was some of the emotional and or education labor that you did with him that was effective
You
besides
know,
his experience of being under that same roof in 2020?
as I was listening to you, I was thinking this one other side that I that went hand in hand in terms of education and growth, right? Like some of this is just time, right? We've been married a decade, we've had kids for 9 years, and there's a little bit of growing up together that happened. And there is a lot of re-education happening on all the fronts in this culture right now, right? This is very new. And by the way, dads are spending 3 times the amount of time with their children than any generation prior, right? So we know that to be true. And still, there's education that needs to happen because parenting has never looked as intense and life has never looked as complicated as it does today. And I do believe parenthood gets bad PR. Like, I think one thing that I really had to educate him on more was that I was fulfilled doing this because I came to it from a place of power of help me do this job better by recognizing the job I'm doing because it's a phenomenal job and a job of value. And I truly believe that. And so the inner work, yes, we can call it emotional work that we have to do, but it's also like deeply fulfilling work to see as valuable. Right. And so for me personally, and it doesn't always feel like that, right? Like sometimes, but if I could sort of macro step out year over year, month over month, and I could go to like, why am I doing this? What parts of this do I really enjoy? How am I growing day to day? And really see that, like, oh, wow, I have grown deeply as a human being raising these kids. I've gotten to work on reactivity. It's something I care so much about. I've been able to express my creativity in a way that, like, for so long, my ego blocked me in doing, and I get to play. I've developed a perspective on what's important and thickened up my skin so I can. And I remember the challenge I had with him more than anything was he would say, like, I just worry you're bored. Like, are you going to be bored? And I was like, I'm actually not bored. I'm less bored here than I was when I was going through the motions of the workplace. And I'm actually figuring out what comes next. And this is like sparking their boring moments. Like the average worker is bored 10 and a half hours a week. And that tracks in parenting too. And I think that approaching him from a place of not from a resentment, but enjoyment of the job I had, but specific asks about what could help me enjoy and us enjoy the stage of life better. And so, was that me holding up more emotional labor at the time? Maybe, but I think that fed my own emotional growth, my own ability to communicate, my own ability to advocate. It strengthened our marriage. And there's certainly times on the other side that I have seen him advocate for his needs and wants and show me how to advocate, right? And there's so many incredible tools right now, Fair Play, and the work that you're doing, the work that he's doing that helps offer the scripts for parents to do that. But I think it starts with the like true deep work of I'm doing work of value. I enjoy this work of value and I'm growing as a human being and I deserve to be healthy and supported. And how can we as a family be the best version of ourselves?
If I were to summarize that, I would say you for some, this is emotional labor because standing in that confidently is challenging, but some that's going to be really easy for them. But it sounds like you being empowered and like showing up as an empowered person in that request of, hey, I'm sleep deprived, or like I need an hour or two off on X amount of days per week. It would make a huge difference for me to continue being able to enjoy this aspect of our life, this chapter of life, for me to have help, a nanny, child support, babysitter, etc. Or me not planning meals and either getting meal service or you picking up some of the slack on that would make an immense difference. So you come into that conversation confident rather than feeling like a victim, feeling like you were being underserved and he needed to improve. It sounds like that is the emotional labor that was effective, like the context of that request.
The context of that request. And by the way, I watch him and he taught me this. He would say, and this is just like on a Saturday and Sunday, he will come out and say, I really need to get to the gym today. When is the best time for me to be able to do that? And then he will say to me, no, don't forget to ask that of me. Like, just say, I need to do this. When is the best way? How is the best way for that to work in our day today? And I think that idea of allowing yourself the permission, believing that you can lead this family and step into this chapter where you deserve to be raising a family as a whole and healthy human, then you get to say, these are what I need. These are the things that I need. How can we make that work within what we have available to us?
If he was one of my clients, the only thing, my critique on that one would be to offer a multiple choice question with a pre-circled answer rather than the open response one. But he's not my client, so I'll
you know what? I would love to do a joint. We should have done a joint episode. That would be fun.
we could
have
we
a
could do
lot
that.
to say.
That'd be fun.
And I will say we play to our strengths. Like, I don't know, and I say this to a lot of women who are on career pauses for family life. It doesn't, like, in the end, if you are at home more, you will do more. Like, that is just by nature of the hours you have available. And it doesn't have to be 50-50. It just has to feel fair. And it just has to feel like you're supported in the ways that you need to be or want to be. When he was fully in startup mode for 8 years, he was in front of a computer a lot more than I was. So he did the doctor's appointment scheduling and the paperwork. I did most everything else, but that was his thing. And, that allowed that piece. And he's just more organized than I am. So he's just able, he just stays on top of deadlines in a very different way. And so we knew that. And he loves to cook. He plans the meals now. And so, in different seasons, he's had more availability or I've had more availability, and we've shifted over and over.
The last question that I wanted to ask, which is part of what you'd shared with me, was what are some of, how has the workforce changed in like a positive direction for moms that are dealing with this challenging problem such that there's a solution called Power of Pause? How has the workforce changed for the better, and or where does it still have a ways to go?
So I think the way it's improved, and we've seen this as a byproduct of 2020, right, is that we all realized that work and family weren't really working, and that actually caregiving is immense and family administration is immense. And I think the work of fair play, and I think the pandemic, there were a number of forces that have finally raised the dialogue around the systems that are no longer. And so there is this moment of great reexamination, and we saw remote work become a mainstay. I really hope that doesn't get walked back, because obviously that has given parents a number of opportunities. I think the boom of freelance and entrepreneurial work is immense, because I think what we're seeing is a sub economy of parents saying, well, we need to make work. We want to stay connected to income on our own terms. And then they start employing other parents because they understand like fractional labor works, right? And so that's really interesting to me as sort of a path forward with more options. I would like to see the, workday map to the school day. I think that would be hugely immense. I think even more than sort of part-time 2-day a week or 3-day a week roles. I think being able to get better alignment with the reality of raising families would really move us forward. And we're starting to see that. I think from a career break perspective, I'm optimistic. I've been talking to LinkedIn, and we've seen in their research that 65% of HR managers feel comfortable seeing a career break in their language on a resume. I still think it's on the returner, and we obviously lay this out in the book, to use all of those non-traditional experiences they've accumulated during their pause to package it up under a career sabbatical for family life and own that story. But I think if we can see a world that we're not only valuing, attaching value to family life, but we're dignifying it. And we're saying, actually, there's immense leadership training that happens in the day to day, minute to minute of family life. And it's actually intellectual and emotional work in the best of ways that sparks a more creative, more efficient, more passionate human. I think that is sort of that next frontier, because then women or men can pause or shift and make room for family life without shame and penalty.
Well, thank you so much for being with me today. I've really enjoyed this conversation and getting to know you. Your book is out in January. When's the release date, and or can it be pre? I'll release this whenever you want me to.
It comes out January 14th, 2025, and you can pre-order anywhere you get your books. And those pre-orders mean the world. I don't, if and when you get to the book process, I'd be so happy to share. It's fascinating to me. Those pre-orders are like, they almost count as votes to booksellers and to the media to say, like, this is an important conversation.
Where I know on Instagram, it's mother.untitled, right?
It's Mother Untitled.
Okay, no dot. Would you say your Instagram is the number one place to find you?
Instagram, or you can subscribe to the newsletter on the site, motheruntitled.com.
Okay, and I'll put that in the show link notes. Neha, thank you again for talking with me today. Really appreciate it, and look forward to helping more moms out there find power in their pause.
Thank you for including this conversation in yours.